June 4th, 1942. 7 a.m. The Pacific stretches endlessly, blue turned gray beneath the rising sun. Waves ripple against the hull of the Japanese aircraft carrier Hiryu, each crest whispering a warning. Admiral Taman Yamaguchi paces the bridge, boots thudding against polished steel, the scent of salt and aviation fuel heavy in the air. His hands clench the railing. Above, the sky is already alive. Squadrons of Zeros streak between the clouds, guardians of the fleet. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the roar of returning aircraft grows louder. Midway's defenders are relentless. Every turn of the propeller, every shadow on the waves, is a potential threat. Deck crews move like shadows, torpedoes and bombs shifting beneath their fingers, engines humming, fuel tanks bristling. The air smells of sweat and tension, mixed with the faint, acrid scent of gunpowder. Men shout orders, voices slicing through the hum of anticipation. Yamaguchi stops, squints toward the distant smoke of Midway Atoll. 2 hours ago, 108 planes were launched in a precise strike against the island. Now, reports flash across the radio, bursts of static punctuated with alarms. Every second counts. Every delay could cost lives, ships, or the fleet itself. The war is not measured in miles or guns. It is measured in moments like this, fragile, fleeting, and poised on the edge of fire. And on this morning, the Kido Butai stands at the precipice of history, unaware that within hours, the tide of battle will crash around them with unstoppable force. By the early morning of June 4th, 1942, the Pacific theater had already become a chessboard of immense scale. Japan's expansionist campaign had swept across Southeast Asia, capturing strategic points in the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies. Control of these regions brought vital resources, oil, rubber, and minerals, fueling the Japanese war machine. Yet the United States, though reeling from the attack on Pearl Harbor just 6 months prior, had begun to reorganize its Pacific defenses, establishing forward bases and rebuilding naval strength. Midway Atoll, a small cluster of islands roughly 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii, had emerged as a linchpin in American strategy, a forward outpost capable of projecting power across the Central Pacific and a thorn in the side of Japan's push toward dominance. The Kido Butai, Japan's elite carrier task force, represented the apex of naval aviation. 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, formed the spearhead of a meticulously coordinated strike force. Each ship was a floating city of aircraft, technicians, and munitions, designed to project air power far beyond the reach of conventional gunnery. In the months leading up to Midway, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had conceived a plan to lure the remaining American carriers into a trap, crushing the United States Pacific Fleet in a single decisive battle. Hiryu's role was pivotal. Commanded by Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, she was one of the few carriers with sufficient range and striking power to launch follow-up attacks after the first wave had struck Midway. The ship's hangars were stocked with dozens of A-6M0 fighters, D-3 Aval dive bombers, and B-5 NK torpedo bombers, each manned by crews trained for precision and speed. A single misstep in timing, a miscommunication, or a delayed launch could expose the fleet to devastating counterattacks, a reality that weighed heavily on Yamaguchi as dawn broke over the Pacific. On the American side, Midway had become a hub of surveillance and rapid response defense. The U.S. Navy had stationed a modest carrier presence, including the USS Enterprise and USS Hornet, along with Midway's shore-based bombers and scout planes. Though outnumbered, the Americans relied on intelligence breakthroughs, particularly the ability to intercept and decipher Japanese communications, to anticipate Japanese movements. By the morning of June 4th, both sides were poised on the knife's edge, Japan seeking to annihilate Midway's defenders and draw the remaining American carriers into a trap, the U.S. readying a smaller but determined force to strike back. In the hours before the attack, tension on Hiryu was palpable. Crew members moved with quiet urgency, adjusting aircraft, checking fuel lines, and bracing the flight deck for launch operations. Every movement, however routine it seemed, carried the weight of potential disaster. Above them, the sky shifted from pale gray to the harsh light of the tropical morning, the sun rising on an ocean that would soon erupt into chaos. Hiryu was more than a ship. It was a floating bastion of Japan's naval ambitions, a fragile platform whose success, or failure, would influence the course of the Pacific War. Every officer aboard understood the stakes. The launch of the first strike against Midway had been meticulously timed, but delays in rearming, weather considerations, and the need to maintain readiness for counterattacks meant that the task force was always on edge. Radar and scout reports filtered in continuously, each signal demanding rapid assessment. A single missed indicator could allow American aircraft to reach the carriers, exposing the ship's lightly armored flight decks to catastrophic damage. The sailors, meanwhile, were no strangers to danger, yet even veterans felt the unease of what was to come. Hiryu's decks were lined with bombs, torpedoes, and fuel, each a potential source of fiery destruction if the Americans located them in time. Discipline and training were their shields. Calm, methodical execution of orders was their only defense. As Yamaguchi walked the bridge, overseeing preparations, he carried not only the responsibility of his ship, but also the lives of every man aboard and the fate of the Japanese strike force itself. This tension, born of meticulous planning and the unpredictable chaos of war, set the stage for one of the most consequential carrier battles in naval history. The next hours would test every measure of skill, courage, and resolve, as the Hiryu prepared to face both the known and unseen threats emerging from Midway's defenses. As the morning progressed, the vast Pacific around Hiryu seemed deceptively calm. The ocean's surface mirrored the sky, pale blue interspersed with streaks of sunlight. But beneath that tranquility, forces of incredible destructive potential were maneuvering with lethal precision. Every carrier in the Kido Butai carried hundreds of men who knew the stakes. A single strike from American aircraft could ignite catastrophic fires on their lightly armored decks. The meticulous coordination of Japan's carriers depended on timing, communication, and the seamless execution of complex launch and recovery sequences. Even a brief disruption could cascade into disaster. Hiryu's deck crews were focused entirely on readiness. Pilots prepared their aircraft, checking control surfaces, bombs, torpedoes, and fuel lines, the hum of engines blending with the faint clang of tools and shouted orders. Flight coordinators moved like clockwork, ensuring that each sortie launched efficiently, with minimal exposure to potential enemy action. These were men trained to operate under pressure, yet the stress of anticipating Midway's counterstrikes added an invisible weight to every decision. Admiral Yamaguchi remained vigilant on the bridge, eyes sweeping across the horizon. Reports from reconnaissance planes filtered in with urgency, each citing a potential harbinger of American interference. The first wave had already been launched, yet a second attack was planned, contingent on the timing of aircraft recovery and rearming. Every pause, every adjustment threatened to throw the operation off balance. The tension was palpable. Not only the safety of Hiryu, but the operational integrity of the Kido Butai depended on precise execution. Midway itself was far from passive. American radar operators and spotters scanned the skies for incoming threats. Bombers, torpedo planes, and fighter escorts were ready to intercept any Japanese attempt at domination. Even with a smaller force, the Americans had turned intelligence into a weapon, decoding Japanese messages and predicting likely maneuvers. Each moment Hiryu remained in place, carefully managing its aircraft, was a race against detection, a precarious balance of offensive readiness and defensive caution. The logistical complexity aboard the Hiryu amplified the pressure. Hangar decks were crowded with ordnance and aircraft in various stages of readiness. Bombs were swapped, torpedoes armed, and fuel topped off, all under the watchful eyes of senior officers. Any misstep could have lethal consequences, yet the men executed each order with near military choreography. The coordination between pilots, gunners, deck crew, and command bridged the fine line between operational success and catastrophic failure. By mid-morning, the Hiryu had launched her first strike and begun recovery of returning aircraft. The pace was unrelenting. Engineers worked furiously to clear planes from landing zones, and deck crews rearmed fighters for follow-up sorties. Each action was dictated by a single, immutable goal: maintain the offensive capability of Japan's elite carriers while anticipating the inevitable American response. In this environment, Yamaguchi's judgment and composure were critical, his presence a stabilizing force amid the orchestrated chaos of carrier operations. Above all, the stakes were clear. Midway was not merely a strategic objective. It was the fulcrum upon which the balance of power in the Pacific rested. The Japanese offensive aimed to decisively cripple the United States carrier strength, delivering a blow so severe that the Americans would be forced into a defensive posture for years to come. Failure, conversely, would not only imperil Hiryu and her sister ships, but would shift the momentum of the Pacific War irreversibly. Every man aboard understood that they were not merely executing orders. They were participants in a moment destined to shape history. As the sun climbed higher, shadows lengthened across the flight deck. Hiryu's planes roared to life, and the first reconnaissance reports of American movements began to filter in. The clock ticked inexorably toward confrontation. The calm of the Pacific, so misleading in its serenity, was about to erupt into a maelstrom of fire, smoke, and steel, a battle that would test skill, courage, and the limits of naval warfare itself. On the flight deck and in the cramped quarters below, the men of Hiryu carried the weight of history on their shoulders. Pilots, mechanics, gunners, and deck crews all moved with a disciplined urgency that masked the anxiety simmering beneath. Sweat dripped from helmets and soaked into fatigues as hands tightened around throttle levers, wrenches, and rifles. The human element of warfare was on full display. Fear, courage, and instinct intertwined in every action. Yamaguchi's officers, stoic yet tense, relayed orders with clipped precision, their voices cutting through the hum of engines and the roar of the Pacific. Every glance, every hesitation could alter the trajectory of an aircraft, the timing of a torpedo, or the success of a mission. Morale balanced on a razor's edge. In these hours, personal endurance and collective discipline determined the survival of hundreds of men, each aware that one miscalculation might cost lives or the mission itself. Fatigue weighed heavily on their shoulders, yet the men pressed on, each breath drawn against the salt-tinged wind, a reminder that human resolve was as critical as steel and firepower. Angle 2. Tactical, carrier operations, and fleet coordination. The Hiryu operated not as an isolated vessel, but as a node in a meticulously orchestrated network, the Kido Butai. Tactical planning dictated every movement, from launch sequences to recovery patterns, to ensure maximum offensive output while minimizing vulnerability. Aircraft were launched in staggered waves, timed for coordinated strikes against Midway's defenses. The Japanese carriers communicated constantly, adjusting positions to respond to American reconnaissance and incoming threats. Tactical foresight was tested at every turn. The margin for error was infinitesimal. Should one carrier falter, it could expose the entire task force to disaster. The deployment of Zero fighters as escorts and interceptors was a key tactical decision, protecting the slower torpedo and dive bombers from enemy fighters. Simultaneously, Hiryu maintained flexibility to adapt, balancing offensive thrust with defensive readiness in a highly fluid, high-stakes environment. Angle 3. Technological, aircraft, weapons, and naval innovation. The Hiryu was a floating arsenal, embodying the cutting-edge naval aviation technology of 1942. Her flight deck teamed with A-6 M0 fighters, D-3 Aval dive bombers, and B-5 Ankate torpedo bombers, each engineered for specific operational roles. Aircraft armaments, bombs, torpedoes, and machine guns required precise handling and deployment. Deck catapults, arresting wires, and elevators synchronized launches and recoveries in rapid succession. Anti-aircraft guns bristled along the superstructure, ready to shred incoming attackers with 25mm and 40mm rounds. Onboard communication relied on radios and signal flags, linking pilots to command in real time, a technological network as fragile as it was critical. Every mechanical component, from engines to ordnance, demanded constant vigilance. Failures could result in catastrophic explosions or missed attacks. In the hands of trained operators, technology became a force multiplier. In the wrong moment, it could be a harbinger of disaster. The interplay of human skill and technological sophistication defined the lethal ballet of Midway. Admiral Taman Yamaguchi's presence on Hiryu was a study in controlled intensity. Every decision, when to launch aircraft, how to maneuver, how to allocate escorts, was calculated under immense pressure. Yamaguchi walked the bridge and oversaw operations with acute awareness of the stakes. The survival of his carriers and men, the effectiveness of the attack, and the broader fate of the Kido Butai. Leadership here was more than strategy, it was temperament. Calm deliberation balanced against the need for swift action. Subordinates relied on his judgment. Yet even the most experienced officers felt the weight of doubt and urgency pressing upon them. Decisions were made with imperfect information. Reconnaissance reports were incomplete, radar limited, and enemy intentions unclear. Yamaguchi had to interpret fragmentary intelligence, anticipate American movements, and order his forces in a high-speed chess game across an expanse of deadly ocean. His leadership exemplified the tension between human judgment and the unforgiving nature of modern naval warfare. Angle 5. Enemy, American naval response. From the perspective of the U.S. Navy, Midway was both a shield and a spear. American forces, scarce but strategically positioned, were conducting reconnaissance, launching torpedo planes and dive bombers, and deploying Wildcats for interception. Every action was a reaction to the calculated threat of the Kido Butai. Intelligence and code-breaking efforts gave American commanders glimpses of Japanese intent, but the carriers and airfields at Midway faced a formidable foe in highly trained pilots, tightly coordinated strikes, and superior Japanese aircraft range. The American strategy relied on timing, surprise, and the disciplined execution of coordinated counterattacks, testing the nerve and adaptability of every sailor and pilot. Each failed or successful maneuver shifted the balance of a battle whose outcome depended on precision and speed. Angle 6. Moral/psychological, courage and sacrifice. War at sea in 1942 was a crucible of fear and resolve. Pilots, gunners, and deck crews confronted the knowledge that every mission could be their last. Fatigue, hunger, and stress tested their endurance as waves of enemy aircraft surged toward them. Courage was not reckless bravery. It was perseverance in the face of overwhelming danger. Each dive, each torpedo launch, and each evasive maneuver carried the weight of human lives, national honor, and personal conscience. Losses were immediate and brutal, but survivors pressed on, driven by duty, camaraderie, and the hope that their actions might change the course of history. On Hiryu, the psychological strain was palpable. The hum of engines and the whistle of wind were interlaced with anxiety, tension, and the thin hope of survival. Heroism existed not just in spectacular acts, but in the persistence, calm, and skill displayed under unimaginable pressure. The Pacific stretched endlessly around Hiryu, a calm surface belying the chaos looming above. By 10:22 a.m., reconnaissance reports confirmed what Yamaguchi had feared, a formation of nearly 50 SBD Dauntless dive bombers descending from high altitude. The Japanese Zeros, exhausted from chasing earlier torpedo planes, were still engaged far below. The Hiryu was vulnerable, alone at the center of a deadly storm. Yamaguchi's eyes scanned the horizon, calculating angles and trajectories as bombs arced silently toward the Kido Butai. Time contracted. Seconds felt like minutes, the roar of engines above mixed with the staccato of anti-aircraft fire. On deck, crewmen gripped railings, their knuckles white, firing every 25 millimeters and 40 millimeters round at the descending swarm. Each dauntless that survived the flak threatened the life of every sailor aboard. Explosions erupted aboard the Kaga and Soryu first, shockwaves shuddering through the Hiryu-S steel. Secondary blasts sent flames leaping skyward, lighting the sea with fire. Yamaguchi barked orders, coordinating evasive maneuvers while signaling for every plane in the air to prepare for a counterstrike. His voice, steady yet urgent, cut through panic. Launch immediately. Protect the Hiryu. 0 fighters. Intercept now. Below deck, mechanics frantically readied dive bombers for a second wave. Fuel lines leaked, bombs were armed, wings repaired in real time. The precision required was staggering. Outside, Hiryu-S superstructure shimmered in smoke and fire. The first bombs from the American dive bombers found their marks on Kaga, igniting hangars and detonating munitions. Yamaguchi's jaw tightened. Every second the enemy gained altitude, every missed shot, every delayed launch threatened annihilation. Yet he held the nerve to order his last available strike. 24 dive bombers under Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi poised to descend upon the unsuspecting American carriers. The deck braced for the imminent explosion, but the Japanese resolve was unbroken. By 11:55 a.m., the last of Hiryu-S dive bombers climbed into position, their wings cutting through the brightening sky. Lieutenant Kobayashi led his 18 aircraft in 2 formations, each poised like predators above an unsuspecting prey, the American Carrier Task Force. Below, the Wildcat fighters streaked skyward, intercepting the first group of Japanese VALs. Flak from anti-aircraft batteries splashed around the bombers, each burst in near-miss that could shred wings or scatter formation. The engagement was immediate and merciless. 7 of Kobayashi's planes were shot down in minutes, for Zeros escorting them fell to superior numbers. Smoke trailed from shattered wings as pilots struggled to maintain control, performing desperate evasive maneuvers while still aiming for targets hundreds of feet below. Kobayashi's voice, calm and clipped over the radio, guided the remaining pilots through the chaos. Precision was all that stood between success and complete annihilation. Below, the USS Yorktown moved erratically, evasive maneuvers attempting to shake the incoming VALs. Bombs dropped in a controlled cascade. The first penetrated the hangar deck, erupting in a violent flash. The second struck amidships, sending twisted steel and fire across the flight deck. The third buried deep into the lower compartments, igniting fuel and munitions. The Yorktown shuddered violently, listing, but remained afloat. Despite catastrophic losses, the attack had crippled her offensive capability. Back aboard Hiryu, Yamaguchi observed the aftermath with a grim resolve. The second wave of attacks loomed, and he prepared the remaining aircraft, the men, and the ship itself for survival. By late afternoon, American dive bombers returned, dropping 2 more bombs on Hiryu-S forward flight deck. Fires erupted uncontrollably, engines failed, and the carrier shuddered, dead in the water by 9:23 p.m. Smoke and fire stretched across the Pacific, illuminating the exhausted survivors huddled in the flickering glow. Through the haze of destruction, Yamaguchi's voice carried orders, maintaining discipline and focus. Even as the Hiryu succumbed to fire and structural collapse, he coordinated final messages, the lowering of the national ensign, and prepared the remaining men for evacuation. The Kido Butai, once the apex of Japanese naval power, had been shattered, leaving only Hiryu and her commander to bear witness to the devastating culmination of Midway. Courage, strategy, and sheer will had delayed the inevitable, but the cost was absolute. The smoke over Midway slowly began to clear. The Kido Butai, once the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, lay in ruins. 3 carriers, Kaga, Akagi, and Soryu, had been obliterated within hours. Hiryu, the last operational vessel in Yamaguchi's formation, was aflame, listing, crippled, and slowly sinking. Across the Pacific, The USS Yorktown and her sister ships bore the scars of the Japanese attack, yet remained capable of counteraction. Casualty reports began arriving with grim efficiency. On the Japanese side, nearly 3,057 sailors and aviators were lost, their lives consumed by fire, shrapnel, and the unforgiving ocean. Hiryu herself carried 1,200 men, of whom roughly 800 survived, including the wounded, scorched, and shell-shocked. Yamaguchi went down with his ship, a final act of duty that was soon memorialized with the Order of the Golden Kite, First Class. Captain Toshio Kaku, steadfast to the end, was posthumously promoted to Rear Admiral for his unwavering loyalty and command. On the American side, the USS Yorktown sustained significant damage, taking multiple direct hits that crippled her flight deck and killed or injured hundreds of crew. Yet, emergency repairs and the resilience of her sailors prevented her loss. The American Carrier Task Force, though battered, emerged strategically intact, poised to continue offensive operations in the Pacific. Strategically, the Battle of Midway had reshaped naval warfare in the Pacific. Japan's carrier fleet, previously unrivaled, had been decimated, leaving the balance of power firmly shifting to the United States Navy. Losses in planes, trained pilots, and experienced crew could not be replaced quickly, a deficit that would affect all subsequent operations. Morale across the Japanese command faltered. Even the most seasoned admirals recognized that a decisive turning point had been reached. Amid the wreckage, sailors from both sides tended to their wounded, repaired critical systems, and counted the cost. Fire-damaged decks, twisted steel, and floating debris littered the sea, a testament to the unrelenting intensity of modern naval combat. The Pacific had been transformed that day, not only in terms of ships lost, but in the stark realization of the lethal efficiency of carrier-based warfare. In the hours following the battle, both sides confronted the full weight of the conflict. Japanese sailors who had survived clung to rafts or floated amidst the debris, faces coated with salt, smoke, and ash. For the Imperial Navy, the psychological toll was immense. The loss of 4 frontline carriers in a single engagement, 3 obliterated in hours, 1 crippled, was unprecedented. Japan's naval strategy, once aggressive and calculated, now faced a critical limitation. Trained pilots and veteran aircrew, the backbone of carrier operations, had been decimated. Replacement numbers were insufficient, leaving the Navy vulnerable for months, if not years. For the United States, the victory was both tactical and symbolic. While USS Yorktown had been nearly sunk, her survival highlighted the effectiveness of damage control procedures, the resilience of American sailors, and the growing mastery of carrier-based tactics. Across the Pacific, morale soared. Reports from commanders emphasized not only the physical damage inflicted, but also the demonstrated vulnerability of Japan's carrier fleet. Analysts in Washington realized the battle had fundamentally shifted the initiative to the United States, creating a window to press further offensives across the Pacific theater. The human dimension of Midway was profound. Survivors recounted the terror of flak-filled skies, the roar of engines from dive bombers above, and the infernal heat of fires raging across decks. On Hiryu, men like Yamaguchi, Kaku, and their crews displayed unwavering discipline amid chaos. In the aftermath, these acts were commemorated in letters, war reports, and posthumous awards, underscoring a grim reality. Heroism existed alongside staggering loss. Strategically, Midway became a blueprint for naval engagements to come. The decisive use of intelligence, reconnaissance, and carrier-launched aircraft demonstrated a new era of maritime warfare. Conversely, Japan's failure to adapt rapidly in real time revealed structural weaknesses. Entire fleets, once symbols of invincibility, had been reduced to ashes or adrift, emphasizing the lethal efficiency of combined American naval air and fleet operations. The Pacific had changed forever. The smoke has long lifted over Midway, but its echoes remain. The Pacific, once a theater of unchecked ambition, now bore the scars of fire and steel, a reminder of human ingenuity, courage, and the high price of miscalculation. Admiral Yamaguchi, the pilots of Hiryu, and countless others had faced impossible odds. Their choices, disciplined and desperate, illustrated both the valor and the fragility inherent in warfare. Midway was more than a battle of ships and planes. It was a confrontation between strategy and chance, calculation and chaos. The United States Navy had seized the initiative, proving that determination, coordination, and sacrifice could tip the scales even against a seemingly superior force. For Japan, it was a sobering lesson. The tools of war, carriers, aircraft, and munitions, were nothing without careful orchestration and the preservation of experienced men. In the quiet aftermath, the human story resonates most. Sailors recovering survivors, mechanics patching damaged aircraft, and officers documenting the day's events were witnesses to a transformation in naval warfare. Midway crystallized a truth that would shape the Pacific conflict for years. Technology can dominate, but courage, timing, and leadership define history. As the sun rises over the waves where Hiryu once sailed, it illuminates the enduring lessons of bravery, strategy, and sacrifice. The currents carry both memory and warning, reminding future generations that even amidst devastation, human resilience persists. The Battle of Midway, in its precision and tragedy, is a testament to the cost of war and the unyielding spirit of those who face it.